Carlos. You're listening to Tools and Bullets, the You and My Discography podcast, a show where a You and My fan and a You and My super fan discuss each of the band's records. I'm Thommy Waite, an Aussie writer and podcaster who's based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the You and My fan in the equation. My co-host and You and My super fan is Sydney-sider Johnno Duncan, the host of the Progressive Rugby League Podcast and general man about town. Johnno, how are you?
Oh, pretty well, Tom. Look, it's bittersweet. We come to the end of a fun ride, and I don't know how to feel, but it's come to this. That's basically how I'm feeling. I'm that kind of like final sort of feeling. I don't know what to think.
The final countdown. Well, fear not, because essentially the band is still a band. They could release another album. And so we would be compelled to record another episode.
That's true.
When and if You and I drop another album. But today, in episode 12, we're doing a recap of the You and My discography as of today, February 2, 2023. And yeah, we're basically just going to be talking about the first 11 episodes where we went through each You and My LP. Before we get stuck in, a quick disclaimer. Myself and Johnno are in no way affiliated to UMI. We're just two fans talking music for the love of the game. If you found this show, there's a good chance you're already familiar with the group known as UMI. But if not, listen to their records, go to their shows, send them all your money and love. They bloody deserve it. Johnno, you seem like a man who, when a radioactive capsule goes missing in WA, you spend sleepless nights tossing and turning, thinking to yourself, how am I somehow responsible for this mishap? What I'm trying to say is that Johnno wants to be a FIFO / sandgroper. No, what I'm trying to say is that Johnno Duncan is a man who likes to do things by the book. So with that in mind, Johnno, how do you think my disclaimer holds up from a legal perspective?
Oh, it's watertight, as it has been throughout. You have been on top of it. I think that's 5 stars for you, and put it on your resume, I think.
Sounds good to me. All right, so we did a little quick game plan about how to approach this recap episode, and basically what we landed on. The conceit of this podcast was, I've always been a You and My fan since I came across the band, but I knew I had a super fan in my circle, being Johnno Duncan, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to learn more about the band and go deeper through doing this discography review with Johnno. So we'll talk about our respective identities as fan / super fan of UMI. Then we're going to go through our podium choices that we explained through the series, our gold, silver, bronze song selections for each album. Then we'll talk about just some general learnings and feelings about what we picked up. And then finally we'll drop a little gold, silver, bronze album podium at the very end. So don't miss out on that one. So, Johnno, you're a super fan. You're still a super fan. What's this been like from, 30,000 feet gone through each episode, each album?
Yeah, look, as I say, it is a bittersweet kind of feeling. There was definitely a risk at the top of this process that I was a bit worried about, that I would come out of this not feeling as strongly about UMI. I guess that was an overload risk that was real. And, you know, I was worried that I might be over it by the end, but the truth is it's been quite the opposite. So I'm relieved that the process hasn't taken the edge off my thoughts for the band, and it kind of feels like a bonus that I come out of it actually more in awe, because we've taken time to go through the songs, and it all sits in the context of what we've learned and what else has been going on. So I feel a bit lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong, I probably will take a decent break from UMI after this, but it won't be for too long. So that's a relief, because that was a real worry of mine. But I come to this point where I'm like feeling that bittersweet feeling. I don't want the ride to end, but of course, you know, less is more. You got to say it till you believe it. You know, even the concept of less is more is bittersweet, because the more only comes after the less, and you have to wait patiently for the more to eventually hit you, because the less is never satisfying in the moment. But anyway, so why are we doing this show? This is what we're trying to get at here. I guess one realization I had about halfway through the series is that this show is taking me deeper than I thought it would. I don't know what I expected at the start, but I guess I expected the personal side of it, the anecdotes, our life experiences with you and I at our metaphorical sides, but I maybe didn't expect the process of track by track, record by record, to get me thinking so much about the act of putting together a record, for example, or the reality of being in a band. So, so it's been fun. And I think I also realized that what we've done, which, not groundbreaking or anything, but it's a fairly rare undertaking to go through systematically from the beginning to end. We love dozens of bands, but how many times have you gone, I'm going to go through their record collection from start to finish, track by track, and try to work, like it just doesn't happen. So you just listen to whatever you want. So I guess it's made me think about a whole bunch of stuff, mostly banal, but I think our audience is a generous audience and they'll be fine with it. But to answer your question, I think I'm more of a fan. What about you?
Yeah, well, I feel like my goal of learning more about the band, kind of learning the things that aren't on Wikipedia, I think was the guiding principle with
Sure.
A lot of the stuff we were trying to touch on here. And you've definitely helped me appreciate the band and learn more about each album and each song. So I'm grateful for that. But I also feel like in many ways I'm kind of just scratching the surface. Like it's made me kind of gain more and appreciate. You've said yourself, you are a super fan. There's probably the super fan out there who knows even more about all the songs and all the albums and the band in general. And so, I definitely feel like I'm kind of just scratching the surface. But just in respect to kind of like music and we've talked about in the early episodes how when you first get into a group, it kind of like sets the tone for your relationship with them for the rest of your life. And I don't know, I equate the period in your life when you got into UMI was roughly the equivalent of when I got into the Vines. And so the Vines had like 1.5 good albums. And now for me, throw on Highly Evolved once every couple years, nostalgic.
Yeah.
It's fun to listen to, and I'm riding my bike around and you get kind of like warm, fuzzy feelings. You remember that. But I guess you were lucky enough to fall in love with a band and kind of immerse yourself in a band where you could kind of grow with them and you could go back a few albums. There was already a bit of a catalog there for you to sink your teeth into, but then you could also kind of like mature with the band and they've been remarkably consistent for the last, 15, 20 years that you've been on board. And it's made me realize that I think you've got to, at least for someone like myself, there's a sweet spot, probably your teenage years up until your early 20s when you can, it's fertile ground to become a super fan.
Yeah.
But then anything beyond that, I think I maybe it's just a time thing. I don't have time or the energy or the devotion that I once had to really become the next level of devoted person who's going to live and breathe everything relating to an artist that you fall in love with. So I guess that's what I've realized and how I've changed compared to how I used to listen to music.
Yeah, I guess it makes me think about, we might talk about it later, but like how context is a real additive. And it's basically a time thing. When you're at that age, you have time to delve into the context, which kind of adds to your appreciation of a record or a band. And that kind of is what we've been able to do through this mechanism of this discography podcast, which otherwise we'd never have the time to do. But doing a podcast, almost puts an obligation on you to do it. And it's been, a whole bunch of fun. And the other thing I guess I should mention is, and we should mention at the top is, because we've come so far and there's a few things we kind of must address. And we could easily skirt around it, but I think we need to. I'm kind of really talking about myself here. I need to sort of grow my is it cojones and balls? Sort of answer two related questions. What's cojones? The first is like the elephant in the room. Like, is UMI's old stuff better than its new stuff? You know, that's really the elephant in the room whenever UMI chat comes in a sort of Australian general music public sense. And then the flow on from that, as you kind of mentioned, we need to do our UMI album podium. I oscillated a bit on this, but while it will be painful to leave 8 albums in the lurch, I think I'm okay with it. I don't think I'd be okay with ranking them 1 to 11. I just don't think that's humanly possible, and it's borderline torturous. But a podium, I think I can handle, and I think it's reasonable. So looking forward to all that.
Yeah, I guess one thing that kind of struck me before we get into all that stuff, and I wanted to run by you, is that when you're kind of the teenage rocker, the guy who gets into the rock and roll band when you're a teenager, I feel like it's this strange thing where you're kind of ahead of your peers in respect to you're relating to men who are like 10 to 15 years older than you, singing about very adult things when you're kind of like an adolescent yourself. So you're living in a world which is beyond you. And so the peers that you exist with, and you know, if you're of that ilk, you're going to have similar friends who are into similar stuff. But I'm saying the majority of people, the mainstream, as they used to call it back in the day, most people aren't into that. They're into more pop orientated things and stuff that's maybe more relatable for your actual demographic. So when you're a teenager, you're listening to UMI, you're imagining what it's like to be an adult. But then I think you become an adult. And then I think it's almost like this inverse thing where rock and roll by its very nature is kind of like an infantile art form. And so it puts you into this, you become of age, and then your peers catch up and they're still of age, and they're basically their intellectual pursuit. Well, I guess they're just doing things that appeal, whereas you get in a state of almost arrested development where you're like, no, but I'm still the teenage rocker at heart. Do you see what I mean? Like I think going through this journey, I've realized that's kind of what I did, is that I didn't feel connected to my peers when I was a teenager because I was, in my mind at least, ahead of them. And now I'm in my 30s. I'm like, I'm behind them because I'm stuck there. Do you feel like getting into UMI when you did put you in a state of arrested development, and you're perpetually kind of stuck as the 16, 17-year-old?
No, I don't feel like that, but I do get what you mean. I guess it's related for me because, as I mentioned probably in the first episode or two, I kind of had some really influential older kind of relatives in my life. My older brother, who got me into UMI, and my older cousin, who was into music as well. And that, I guess as a kid, I was an anxious kid as well. I think Nervous Kid is one of my favorite songs. And it kind of, I was always kind of hoping or looking forward to getting out of adolescence. It didn't feel right for me. And I was looking up to my older brother and my older cousin, and it felt like they kind of were a bit more certain about their place in the world. I'm like, I'm looking forward to getting to that point. And so because no one in my kind of age circle liked UMI, it was always people above me. So I was kind of, that's what I kind of empathize with what you're saying about being into a rock band. That I'm kind of nodding along there. And then, being a super fan of a rock band becomes part of my identity, I guess, as I get into my 20s. But then, like, being sort of aligned to UMI, I feel like knowing the context and everything and how they're developing as a band and as adults, I feel like I totally understand what you mean, like with rock and roll as an art form, where people are kind of like going, oh, rock and roll, that's a bit quaint. It's like, good on you. Like, I love rock and roll. But like at the same time, you know, the way that we've spoken about through the series about how the band has kind of matured and kind of jumped off the train, the industry train, and not worrying about how they're perceived as much, even though I'm sure it's still important, but it's just kind of doing their own thing, which is kind of a good life lesson and a good adult way of approaching things. And at the end of the day, they're still friends after 30 years, which is kind of a big achievement as well. So yeah, I get what you're saying, but I would like to think as a super fan, maybe I'm just justifying it all to myself, that it has walked alongside me as I've matured into my late 30s. So that's how I'm justifying it to myself. It hasn't all been a waste of time.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I kind of trying to unpack my own sentiment a little bit more. I think what I've realized about myself is that falling in love with rock and roll and certain bands when you're a teenager, if those bands have longevity, and I would argue pretty strongly UMI do, they grow, they make more complex music. I think people allow you to, it's expected for you to grow with them if those bands are still making music. Especially if it becomes more and more age appropriate as they get older, then of course you can keep liking them. But I find that I'm almost like I'm still chasing the high of like finding new bands and being interested in new music that other people are like, yeah, why are you watching 25-year-olds make music? You should have aged out of that now. Whereas I'm still like, no, I feel like I'm almost I'm not going to shake that because I'm almost like I'm chasing that first high still. And I'll get it from anyone no matter what state I'm in, being age or look or state of decay. I'll always be going back to the well looking for that first high.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, and I guess that is one of the things that I think I mentioned last episode, which kind of, I guess, COVID taught me the power of new music, the importance of new music and getting something fresh within you and for you to kind of contemplate. And I guess the question then becomes, are you looking at it? Are you looking for that that new stuff like in different places? Like, you're looking, because you go through that. If you listen to Triple J, for example, you'll hear new rock bands come through, and then after number of years, you're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of when X band came through 10 years ago. Oh, that reminds me of when X band came through 15 years ago. But I guess there's new music coming from all different areas, which I know you definitely delve into from different areas. So it's about not only looking for new music from the 25-year-olds, but it's new music from the 40-year-olds and the new music from the 60-year-olds and the new music from the R&B artists or the new music from the blues artists or whatever. So that's kind of like the lesson for me as well about where broadening your horizons, I guess, a bit more, even though we're talking very much a specific band here, but it still makes me think of the importance of going beyond where you'd be naturally comfortable with.
You make a good point. I'm not still that well trained adolescent reading the enemy being like, here's a hot new band you should like because the members of the band look pretty. It's any type of new music really. And you're helping me flesh out my point here really, because I think that I think that a lot of people, if you're a music fan or you liked music when you were younger, you get your 5 groups and then it's like, all right, these are the ones I like. I'll come and see them do when they come to my town. I'll go watch them do their best of shows, and maybe I'll give their new albums a chance. But I'm really in it for the old stuff. Or then there's even the more surface level music fan who's just like, oh, I like country music, so they're a Spotify playlist. Just the algorithm can decide what I listen to, and so it's like, I don't know, they like some alt country, they put it on an alt country mix, you're having a couple drinks at their place and you're like, oh, this is a cool tune, who's this? And they're like, I don't know, Spotify. And so there's this completely detached relationship that you have, which is so foreign to me, where it's like, if I'm in a place now and I hear a song, I get Shazam out and I figure out who it is and I add them to my Apple Music. I want to know who the fuck it is, so I can kind of go down that rabbit hole. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
I
the same.
definitely, I'm definitely not in the, I grew up in the Get Born generation. Roll over DJ, mate, kill the fucking DJs. It was just rock and roll. And, yeah, I'm completely over that now. You know,
Yeah.
that was this, I was ripe for the picking at a certain age, and kind of you and I were lumped into that as we discussed kind of the Deliverance era or whenever that new rock thing was happening.
Yeah.
But I completely grew out of that. I've like, you know, acid house was something that I always wanted to get into because, you know, some writers I liked it, but last couple of years it finally clicked. I was like, I don't need to be on drugs to appreciate this music. I like it for what it is, and that's refreshing. But you're right. I'm always going to be seeking new music from all different sources, and I think it's because of those early experiences, getting hooked on it. When I did, it was very exciting at the time, and it kind of opens your world up.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there, and the art of discovery is important when it comes to music for me. Like, I think that's what you're getting at with like the character at that party or the Spotify playlist. It's like I feel a bit offended by algorithms kind of telling me that I'll like this. I'm like, no, I'll decide what I like. So that's why I've always kind of been a bit uncomfortable with those kind of playlists, even though they're probably like spot on. But the satisfaction comes from going through the liner notes and going, oh, what does this name mean? Oh, I might check this name out. And oh, that actually is pretty cool. So you feel like you've discovered it yourself. You haven't been handed it on a plate. So earning that enjoyment is part of the fun. That was always part of the fun for me, and it's still really satisfying, even though as you get older you don't have as much time to delve into the context and sort of grab some of that additive that I mentioned before. Yeah.
Well, why don't we remind the listeners what our podium selections were throughout the series? We'll just rattle them off, and then we can maybe do a bit of compare and contrast, see what we landed on similar stuff and what we did differently. Johnno, what do you want to? Have you got the list on your
got
side ready to go?
Yeah. So first sound as ever, I went. This is like you sent me the lists during the week, and I looked at some of them like, oh wow, well, this is huge. First sound as ever, this is one of the big ones. I went Rosedale at number 3, Coprolalia number 2, Everyone's to Blame number 1. There's no sign of Berlin Chair. There's no sign of Sound as Ever. There's no sign of Adam's Ribs. There's no sign of James Got a Gal. This like when I read that, I'm like, wow, that really smacks of desperation. Like really trying to justify my super fanness that I wouldn't have any of those.
Get some of these boys off the bench. Go on, give them hell in the second half.
Yeah. So like I'm tempted to kind of to change that, but actually I'm happy that they're great songs, and that's how I felt at the time, and I think I'm just going to stick with what I went with. So Rosedale, Coprolalia, and number 1, Everyone's to Blame. Who was yours?
All right, so we're going to do it. So mine was 3. My bronze was Sound as Ever, silver was Berlin Chair, and 1 was Adam's Ribs. So I went for the obvious choices. You went for the underdogs on Sound as Ever.
Yeah, so I think I remember sort of trying to. I think I had like the super fan in my grill, like in my imaginary grill at that time, sort of going, "You're going to go Berlin Chair, aren't you?" And so I told him where to go. So or her. So yeah, Hi-Fi Way. My number 3 was Grey. Number 2 was How Much Is Enough, and number 1 was Minor Bird. Yourself?
So we had 2 crossovers there. Bronze, Minor Bird. 2, Hand Washer. 1, How Much Is Enough.
Yes, I remember we haven't had much crossovers. That was one of the rarities. Ali Daly, I went number 3, the Buy Me Your Dinner track, Ali Daly. Number 2, If We Can't Get It Together. And number 1, Who Takes Who Home.
I went bronze, Flagfall, $1.80. Silver, Mr. Milk. Gold, Baby Clothes.
That kind of reminds me, like I've noticed as I go through my list, I have a lot of like opening and closing tracks. Just there, I've got Ali Daly and Who Takes Who Home. Number 4 record, which was the record that really changed my life. Number 3, Plans. Number 2, The Cream and the Crock. Number 1, Heavy Heart.
Yeah, so this is one instance where I had buyer's remorse on number 4 record.
Oh, yeah.
Originally, I went with, for my bronze, I went with and Vandalism. And I'm going to replace it with Plans. And
Nice.
Essentially, so just so we don't bury the lead here, me and John have gone ahead and created 3-disc best ofs with our gold, silver, bronze podiums, and so I think this is why I needed to swap it out, because with that in mind, I kind of wanted to cover all my different bases in terms of different types of songs, and I felt like Plans was just a bit more unique compared to the Vandalism choice, so that's why I got swapped out, but it was definitely 4th. So Plans comes in at bronze, Heavy Heart silver, and Junk is gold.
Oh yeah, Junk. Tempted. Dress Me Slowly. Number 3, Kick a Hole in the Sky. Number 2, Judge Roy. Number 1, Weeds.
Yeah, so I went 3, Doug Sam, silver, Weeds, 1, Damage.
And that was the album where I reordered the album. I rejigged it for the boys.
I've got this. Johnno came to the forefront, figured it
As I
out.
was saying before, the art of piecing an album together, I really gave it a crack. Deliverance, number 3, Who Put the Devil in You? Number 2, Nifty Lil Number Like You. And number 1, Crash. I must admit, when I read those, I'm like, wow, Crash number 1. But yeah, love the song. I was surprised to put it number 1, but I'll keep it there.
Yeah, so Deliverance on what am I talking about? It was Dilettantes I had the most difficulty with, but I guess Deliverance was probably my second least favorite album but anyway, I still got 3 solid tracks. I got Ribbons and Bows at bronze, Deliverance silver, and gold was When You Know What You Want.
Ah, yes, of course. I was quite envious of not having that in my top 3. Convicts, I'm a Mess. Number 3. Number 2, Constance George. Number 1, Nervous Kid. No, Nervous Kid.
Strong choices. For Convicts, I had 3, Gunslingers. 2, Thank God I've Hit the Bottom. Number 1, Thuggery.
Yeah, nice. Dilettantes. Yeah, I remember we were talking about this one. You were struggling to get into this one. Number 3 for me, Dilettantes. Number 2, Davy's Gone Green Again. And number 1, Jolly's First Time Around the Sun.
Yeah, so I went 3, Jolly's First Time Around the Sun. 2, Giving Up and Getting Fat. Number 1, Byrd Guest Day, or Byrd Guest.
Yeah.
Or BU Guest Day.
Yeah.
So jest. However you like it. Yeah,
Yeah.
It was interesting going on to the next, the self-titled after we did that one, because I was like, it made me question, was there that much of a difference in terms of the songwriting, both kind of like artistic, way more complex music, I would imagine, compared to the early stuff, but could just been production stuff that wasn't, didn't hit the spot.
Yeah. I think I'm the same. Like, I really like Dilettantes, as I said in the episode. I rate it really highly, but the beauty of listening to it in sort of quick sequence is that you kind of can make that judgment and sort of say, okay, yeah, this is what they were trying to do, and then they kind of developed further and kind of nailed it in the self-titled. So self-titled for me, 3, Let's Not Get Famous. 2, Trigger Finger. 1, Waiting to Be Found Out.
I went bronze, Kicking the Balustrade. Silver, We Hardly Knew You. 1, The Ocean.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And then we had a hiatus, and then we had Porridge and Hot Sauce from 2015. This was a really cool and varied album and a lot of fun. Number 3, She Said Goodbye. Number 2, Buzz the Boss, Davy's Tune. And number 1, Beehive.
Yeah, so this is the other one I swapped out. Originally on Porridge and Hot Sauce, I had Demons for my bronze. And I kind of realized when I was putting together my 3-disc best of that I feel like Demons is kind of similar to Hand Washer in many ways, but similar sentiment, I guess, from a different, slightly different, but very similar sentiment. And so I replaced Demons with an East Doncaster Girl, Silver, Porridge and Hot Sauce, and one was My Old Friend. Yeah, and I think that all of those choices there were just stuff that I was like, yeah, songs that you don't really hear on any other UMI album from both a production and songwriting perspective. So I felt compelled to chuck them in because, that's the quirks of each of those songs, specifically why I really like the band. So felt obliged to chuck them in.
Yeah, and they'll be welcome on a 3-disc triple album best of. And then finally, The Lives of Others from 2021. Number 3, On My Whole World Tonight, another Davey tune. Number 2, The Third Level. And number 1, Would Have Been Me.
And finally, I went with lookalikes for the bronze, Would Have Been Me for the silver, and The Waterboy to close it out with the gold.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was kind of envious of your triple album best of collection. It just looked so good on paper, and I'm happy with mine as well. But yours was fantastic. Can you, without sort of going through it track by track, can you give me a sense of what you were going for in terms of piecing that together and how you went about it? Because I had troubles to kind of work out where to start, like how am I going to do it? So I'm curious how you went about it. You probably didn't think about it as much.
Well, no, I did actually put a bit of time and effort into it, and the thing that I was kind of most conscious of was in best ofs that I've listened to, I liked it when bands would fuck around with the sequencing where it's like the big album closer, they would put that in the middle, and for some and on the best of or the compilation disc, it would still work. So I've always been like, okay, what are the other songs that come in at track 3 or track 4 could be great openers? And so just to give you a little hint, on my best of disc 1, I went Berlin Chair to open it, and then I closed it out with Junk.
I love that.
Then for disc 2 best of, I started with Doug Sam, and then I closed it out with Thank God I've Hit the Bottom.
Yeah, I when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that is like genius. I enjoyed that. Yeah, that was really good. And how did you approach like the time factor? Because there was one instance where I'm like, well, how do you mix like the Lives of Others from Sound as Ever? Should you keep them apart in the discs, or did you not worry about that at all and just assume that like it's roughly the same era for the purpose of putting this together? Or were you conscious of time and distance?
Yeah, no, I tried to really mix them up in terms of eras as well, because there are greatest hits where you can kind of like, it is nice to go through the era of you can be like, oh, this is when the band started, and I did. You said I didn't put as much work into it as you did, but I went ahead, at least for my first disc, and added them all together on my Apple Music just to see what the transitions would be like. And I found that, that was the most important thing for me. I'm not a complex man. It's like an up, and then a down, or just kind of like all about kind of how does the ride go in terms of and sometimes you play with the dynamics, like on best of disc 2, I started off with Doug Sam, big kind of glammy opener, and then I went down to Hand Washer for track 2. So I think you can play with that sometimes. But what I realized with doing this is that because they've got so many great songs and hits, singles, this wasn't really a greatest hits. It's kind of like you're taking a sample of everything, and it's very personal as well. So I didn't feel obliged to try and go like through the eras of like, okay, we're starting early and then it kind of transition from there. So I really tried to change it up and be like an even spread of the albums on each disc. And yeah, that was kind of my thinking in terms of and in terms of closing out disc 3. I started with Mr. Milk and then I ended with Gunslingers. So that's really how I started. I figured out the opening and ending track on each disc, and then I filled it in from there. But
well, I was trying to think about how to go about it, and I ended up like you, was really all about the transitions and sort of thinking in my mind, how does this song end? How does this song start? Yeah, that works, and kind of just changing the order constantly. I was conscious of timing and I guess era. So what I did is I split my first disc is kind of like the first half of it, kind of covers between Sound as Ever and Deliverance, but of the rockier tunes. So I've sandwiched the quieter, more contemplative tunes in disc 2, and surrounding them I've got the first half of the band's discography from Sound as Ever to Deliverance, the more rockier tunes in disc 1, and the more rockier tunes from Convicts to The Lives of Others on disc 3, and then disc 2 I've just got a collection of the more considered and contemplative songs, starting with Weeds, getting into If We Can't Get Together, Waiting to Be Found Out, Crash, Heavy Heart, Grey, those kind of tunes that I thought would be interesting to hear as a collective, because a typical You Are My album will be, let's say, like a rockin' album with the odd acoustic tune or the odd slower tune. So I thought it'd be interesting just to pop them all together, see how that sounds. So I haven't actually listened to it. It's all been in my mind, but I wouldn't mind actually putting it together and seeing how it goes.
Well, yeah, we'll do this. We'll create separate Spotify playlists and we'll link them in the episode description, and they can live forever until the algorithm shuts them down. Yeah, and people can have the Thommy Waite experience and the Johnno Duncan You and My Through the Years experience. And I just think in general I'm more of the, at least when it comes to You Am I, I'm going for the more upbeat mid-tempo or the balls out rockers. You're going for the more contemplative, emotional, earnest tracks. Am I correct? That seems to be our kind of difference here.
Yeah, I think I have a few more of those. But yeah, I think we both sort of cover the gamut. I mean, you were talking about Hand Washer. I've got sort of Coprolalia in there. So yeah, I guess yours. So I was kind of envious looking at yours. I'm like, mine doesn't even have Berlin Chair. Like I was kind of like slapping my forehead, going, "What?" But you that's kind of how I felt or / feel. I guess it's a point in time. It's after decades of listening to this stuff, and it's how I feel right now. So you got to stick with it.
Like going through this process, album by album, song by song, what are some like tunes that have really elevated going through this? They can be on your list or not. Like what? Because I've got a couple that I liked before, but going through it, I've really appreciated it more and more. Do you have any that spring to mind?
I'd like to hear yours if that's okay. I'd like to have a quick think as you're sharing yours, because
sure. Well, I get it's ironic because neither are actually on my my list here, but mainly just because they're both off Hi-Fi Way, but Ain't Gone and Open and Pizza Guy are two where I think they are like brilliant album tracks. For different reasons. Ain't Gone and Open is the kind of setting the scene for Minor Byrd, as we discussed, and I think I didn't really appreciate of like how of the time it was, and it because I think I mentioned this when we did those eps, the Hi-Fi Way, Ali Daily, number 4 record era, how people were saying, You and I were like the Australian Beatles during the 90s and stuff like that, and I kind of knew that. I saw the the old footage and I could appreciate the kind of buzz and the hype about them.
Mm.
But there was something about these particular tracks where I was like, oh, wow, it wasn't just the big hits. It was these other ones where I just think those two tracks, Ain't Gonna Open and Pizza Guy, sound so fucking cool to this day. And they really do an amazing job of tying songs together in their albums. And I think that those two songs are kind of like atmosphere, you know, the outro to Pizza Guy where it's got that kind of jam and the background noise atmosphere type of stuff. I was like, wow, this is stuff that, because I was really forced to listen to it and pay attention to it, it made me realize like how if you were like a young kid in the 90s and you come across this, you'd be like, this is the coolest band in the world. This is fucking amazing. So they're two ones that spring to mind, which, you know, we did those episodes like a couple of months ago, or the Hi-Fi Way episode a couple of months ago, and it's stuck with me, those two tracks.
I'm glad you picked a couple of tracks that are not on your best of list, because I've always had a weird kind of relationship with best ofs, because my sense is, let's say you come to a band, I don't know, pick a band that's got a wide, a long sort of catalogue, let's say Midnight Oil or something, and you get their best of, you start with the best of. My sense is, if you start with the best of, you're not going to go beyond that, because like I don't have the time to go. Well, if this is the best, I'm not going to. But like, you don't have time really. But like, so I'm always a bit worried about best ofs. But the truth is, like, you often get more satisfaction from songs that are not on the best of, and like we were saying before, the art of discovery and that satisfaction that you get from piecing things together. So that's important to kind of acknowledge, and everyone would know who's listening to this that all the songs that are not on the best of, just because they're not, that doesn't mean they're not worth consideration. But to follow on from you, one that I've just thought of is Judge Roy. Have a bit more appreciation for that from that tune, because we kind of learnt the story of Judge Roy during that episode, and he's quite a mythical and storied figure in that part of America. So that kind of added to the story, and the song made more sense to me, and I really I thought, actually it's like a really cool tune and kind of underrated. Sometimes, like, it's funny, sometimes opening tracks can get lost, even though like they're introducing the album to the listener. You can forget about the opening track, because like, it's 40 minutes later and you're still going, and like, oh, what was the opening track again? So yeah, Judge Roy is one of those songs that I think I didn't quite appreciate as much as I do now. So that's one that comes immediately to mind. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess that kind of leads to the context point that we wanted to touch on. Like, do you feel is there a thing of like knowing too much? If you're filled with too much information or kind of backstory, does it get in the way? Or I'll leave it there.
No,
what are your thoughts?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think for me, and it probably says something about my personality. It's an additive, and like for me, you kind of, more you understand it, the more respect you have for it, even though it could be annoying for the artist. I mean, the why it comes to mind is because I can tell that having Detours as like a companion piece really amplified your feelings towards some of the records, I reckon, from just listening to you speak about it. And it makes total sense. I mean, you think of someone like Nick Cave and what he's been through over the last several years, and you kind of know that stuff, and an album like, I don't know, Ghosteen is, a lot more powerful from knowing that. You think of Archie Roach and his story of being from the stolen generation, and then like a song like Let Love Rule becomes like, the biggest act of grace in history, or his story about his relationship with his wife Ruby, and then what sounds like a simple love song, almost brings you to tears kind of thing. So I get that plenty of songwriters just want to let the songs speak for themselves, but as a listener and like a fan of songwriting, the backstory kind of works for me, and getting to know the artist works for me. So I'm a sucker for that. Does that make me less of a lover of the art and more just a nosy Nelly? Maybe, but like, I think that maybe explains a bit of it, and that's what I was talking about, getting back to my personality. But I hopefully only explains just a small part of it. What do you think?
I agree with all that, and probably the one stipulation here is that I've mentioned him before on the show. One of my favorite comedians, American dude Kurt Metzger, he was complaining about all the recent Netflix documentaries where they will take a story and drag it out over 6 episodes, where they could have punched it out in snappy 45 minutes, all the juicy bits. And he's like, I don't want to fuck around. I'll read the Wikipedia article. I want to know what happened. Like just the basic. If something salacious happens and you are a nosy Nelly, you want the dirty deets done dirt cheap, and you want them now. And so I think that like comparing that to like songwriting or something like that, if the song is great and it stands on its own 2 legs, then the context can only be it's like you get 2 aspects of satisfaction. The song is great, and then you also know a bit more, so it's like that's cool as well. If the song sucks, you should just go pick up New Idea and read about what happened. Like that's what you're more interested in. So
that's the point.
I think broadly speaking, in terms of going through the UMI story, reading detours, learning a bit more, I've enjoyed it because, as I've mentioned many times on this pod, I'm not a lyrics guy. I'm a melody guy, and just the sound of the guitars is what appeals to me more than the actual lyrics. So I've never paid attention to lyrics. So it was good to force myself to read the lyrics, and then by reading detours, I kind of got even lyrics that I knew. I was like, oh, that's kind of maybe what he's getting at in the context of this song. So I found it useful. But if you were someone who paid attention to the lyrics, then maybe you'd be like, yeah, that's obvious. I knew that already. I don't know.
And on a related note, going through this process, do you think it got me thinking? Because as you go through the process, you take time to listen to records, and you give everything a chance, and you learn a bit more about the context. And so what we're saying is it adds to your appreciation. Do you think that doing this would add to your appreciation for like all bands? If you kind of gave all bands this kind of chance, would you get to this part of the journey and go, oh, I feel like stronger about this band, or would you be exhausted and like I'm over it? I wonder. I get the sense that only a quality band would allow you to enjoy the experiences and leave you wanting more after doing this kind of thing. Because as I said, I was worried at the beginning of the overload risk, and I was kind of relieved that it didn't impact my enjoyment of the band. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on if it would work for every band, any band, or only the best.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I think it. I remember watching Steve Kilbey and the Church play a live show on KEXP, the radio station from Seattle. They've got a really popular YouTube channel. Heaps of cool bands go in there and play a live set. It's broadcast on YouTube. And he was touring the States with the Church in just before COVID, it must have been. And they were doing a song off his new album, and he's like, so in his weird voice, he's like, so with this song, we all just pretended we were like, everyone was David Bowie, and we all just done some magical drugs in the bathroom, and then we're going to come out and we're like, tonight we're going to write the coolest song in the world. And and it was kind of lame. The song was cool, but there was literally no backstory apart from just like a bunch of middle-aged musos were like, let's write a cool song. Let's
pretend and then write a new song.
Yeah, it was the type of things that a bunch of 14-year-olds would be, let's pretend we're rock stars and write a cool song. And it's like, I guess there's a nice full circle story there. But I think at that point, and I think it's almost about like the Church has something like 30 albums or something. So it becomes, of course, they're going to like, there's not going to be too much actual biography or like macro life stuff filtering into every record. Or it does just become about the music. for
Yeah,
certain
that's true.
bands if they have a certain amount of records out. And then also that being a perfect example where it's like, I wish I didn't hear that about Steve. Steve explained that. It was kind of like, yeah, I would have liked the song a bit more if it was just like left alone.
Bit mysterious. Yeah.
Yeah, some things you don't want to know. So I think Tim Rogers has done a pretty good job of having in that interview I shared with you where he was like, yeah, I'm good at it. Like he was one of the few times I saw him kind of own his role as a rock star and said like, I'm one of the few people who's actually good at it, where you can straddle the line of opening yourself up with your art, but then also maintaining a certain element of mystique. And but yeah, he's also got a bunch of solo albums as well. So, you know, which we haven't discussed too much here, or at least kind of what he's the biography or life stuff, the context stuff that he's putting into those. So is that it? Is it just like how many albums you've put out?
Yeah, maybe. I guess it comes down to like, because I said at the top, less is more. But I'm at the end of this process and I'm like, oh, I could keep going. But is that just because the band's really good, or is it because I'm just a blind super fan? Or would you feel the same way about going through any band's back catalogue because you're giving it the time and trying to understand what they were doing and the process and the context? So yeah, I think where I landed on that is, I guess you would probably appreciate, you know, what the band's been trying to do more, but you wouldn't necessarily enjoy the process or the experience of the process necessarily. But you'd probably come out of it going, oh yeah, I think I get what they were trying to do. And you'd sort of like, but so luckily for me, I got that, but the enjoyment remained to the end. So that's kind of what I was relieved about.
Yeah.
But one thing, sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to tick to a different but related topic, but if you want to keep going on this, feel free to riff a bit further.
Well, I just piggybacking off what I said in terms of that interview. Tim Rogers did an interview with this Melbourne muso, Rav Thomas. It's on Rav Thomas's YouTube channel. It was 2 years ago, and I found it interesting because like Rav asked Rogers what he thought of UMI's legacy and like can he listen back to his albums, and his response was really interesting because he was basically like he was talking about Tim Rogers talking about his daughter and saying, oh, I could like share some of the albums I did when I was a younger man with my daughter now, and she appreciates them, and that's kind of breathed a bit of life into them for him. Yeah. But he also said something interesting in terms of like when he was questioned about the legacy of UMI, and he was talking about like it was very kind of like image based. It was like, you know, Rusty was a great drummer and he looked so cool, and Andy was always so handsome and looked so cool, and Davey was just like, you know, his hair was awesome. It was like, it was interesting for me because I think that like thinking about like why bands find success, it's like this strange kind of mixture of like you got to have great songs, but it's also kind of like the attitude and the way that you kind of present yourself. And in that interview, Rogers was also saying that like he almost seemed a little bit embarrassed that he was like too hard on his sleeve, and he was comparing himself to bands like the Strokes or something where they kind of like knew they were the shit already at age 22 and just owned it. And he said, and he was talking about how he struggled to kind of go back and listen to his stuff or appreciate his stuff because it seemed like they were like, he was clearly like, there was a lot of anxiety and a ball of kind of like feeling imposter syndrome or something. And that was because it was interesting for me because I think that like, you know, I think it always comes down to the songs. Like the older I get, the less I care about image, but it's definitely a very important part of the rock and roll experience, I think, for those who are partaking and those who are consuming. But what did you think about that whole kind of legacy conversation in that interview?
Yeah, I felt like he explained that really well and what he'd gone through he's thinking about the band throughout his experience. I think he's sort of come to a much more accepting point of view now. Like, probably for a number of years he struggled with the history and didn't enjoy thinking about it or listening to it, and just wanted to do new stuff, and was annoyed that people would always want to talk about the old stuff, and that probably played into that as well. But I think it's just as you get older, you kind of realize, oh, hang on, I made stuff that people really liked, and look, my daughter even wants to learn how to play Jules and Bullets on guitar and stuff like that. So I think that's, hearing you speak about that has crystallized one insight about we got there right at the end, about why I love You Am I so much, and why people like me and people like us like You Am I so much, is that mix of how they looked and the attitude and the songs and the meaning of the songs. Like, there was an earnestness or a hard on the sleeve kind of angle to it, but at the same time they looked pretty cool. So it was like a weird mix of like just looking pretty awesome but like being open with emotions and sort of just this is how I feel, and like heartbroken or whatever. So that is a cool sort of mix. And also I remember hearing Tim speak in the past as well, like just those kind of like Dime a Dozen radio interviews on Triple J or something. What are the ingredients of being a rock star, and Tim has said in the past, is like 10, 15 years ago, he would say, well, you got to love what you do, and if you're not enjoying it, trust me, don't bother. And then the other thing is, he would say, which surprised me at the time, is like, you got to look cool, you got to look the part, you got to dress snappy. You can't just like go out like with a t-shirt or so he was always of the, he still does it when he goes out. He's kind of like got a unique suit, or trying to ham it up or glam it up. So that's always been his attitude. Whereas so he's not shying away from that, which I think is good as well. So it's a bit especially in an era where everyone's trying to be kind of like their authentic self. I'm just going to go up and just be me in my grey t-shirt and jeans. Tim's like, no, you got to he's kind of trying to live up to that mystique a bit, or trying to create that level of putting the artist on a bit of a pedestal, but also at the same time laughing at themselves at the same time. And so there's a weird mix that kind of makes it all work for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you were going to jump to, but for me, I think we can kind of segue into the question, is the old stuff better than the new stuff? Because like, if you ask me that question, I'd say no, it's different. I think that they've matured as musicians, and I think they've made more, at least with some of the later albums, it's more complex music compared to what they did when they were younger men. But I still think that I understand why people want to perhaps listen to the earlier records, because you can't kind of disentangle the image stuff from it. And the kind of like the excitement, the palpable excitement that you kind of get from those earlier records. So better is perhaps but kind of like more like of the moment, or like just pop in terms of like what's going to appeal to a broader mass of people. It's going to be those early records. Yeah. Because I think it's like, it's still great songs, and they're not all just kind of like, we want to be number one on the charts type of vibe. They're complex, and they've got the concept album thrown in there as well. But that's basically where I fall on it, is that I personally don't think that the older stuff is way better than the new stuff. But I understand why people prefer it.
I think the nostalgia thing is real for all of us. We all roll back to the records we loved between the ages of 15 and 25, and trying to control for that is virtually impossible. But on the question, this is what I've tried to do. This is kind of the big questions as we've gone through this. For me, in the background has been this question: is their old stuff actually better than their new stuff? And this process is the only way to kind of get a sense of an answer to that question. So as a super fan, I've always been strident that the quality of You Are My has, generally speaking, not waned over time. I've stridently held that view, but of course I'm going to say that, I'm a super fan. I think the general Australian music public would probably say, oh yeah, if You Are My came up in conversation, they go, oh yeah, You Are My, Ali Daily, Hi-Fi Way, are they still going? Oh yeah, cool. The intimation there being that new stuff, good on them, but not really worth my time getting into, because, how can you top those early records? And yeah, as I say, the question of the relative quality of the canon has occupied my mind at various times. Most often in between albums, like when a new album comes out, I'm all over it. And how many times have I said to you, Tom, when we've discussed the new You Are My album, I'm like, I reckon this is right up there. This might be. And so,
they're all right up there for Johnno. Yeah,
that's right. And then like the period passes and other bands take up your attention. And at times I've wondered, is, Joe Australian music public actually right? And the thing is, the only way to really find out one way or another is to go ahead and do what we did, go through track by track, record by record, and consider it as thoughtfully as we can. And of course, as I've said, who has the time to do that in the normal course of events? So the podcast puts that obligation on you. And so that's the beauty of doing what we've done. And in this case, the beauty of doing this and putting that effort in is that it being a passion, it's all a lot of fun, and it's been paid back in spades. So I'm wary of recency bias as well, but going through all the records in order in pretty quick succession, I'm left in absolutely no doubt that there are records in the second half of their career that at the very least match their storied early records, which of course are brilliant. And so, I say people are probably like rolling their eyes and stuff, but if you don't believe me and you think that's just like a super fan talking, do what we did, check for yourself. I reckon unless you're absolutely wedded to an era like the 90s or something, I find it hard to believe that your podium of You Are My albums will be filled with just the 90s. Maybe one, maybe even two. But at the very least, you'll get a better appreciation of what they've tried to do, and at the most basic level, you'll enjoy the albums more. And so, yeah, like I say, I'm wary of the nostalgia thing, and it's hard to try to control for that. So there is a risk that I have to acknowledge that I'm overcompensating for that. But I'm telling you, if you put all those records at the same point on the starting line, so without giving some of those records a head start because of your memories of how it was way back then, I can't see how you'd listen to some of their later stuff and say that's of inferior quality to anything. So that's where I've landed. It's pretty predictable, but that's right.
Yeah, well, I guess probably to back you up, what I think, because you think about the trajectory of the artist is that when you start, the adage, you've got your whole life to write your first record or novel or whatever, and then you've got 12 months to write your follow-up. And so you can kind of blow your wad pretty early in the piece. But the upside being that you are maturing as an artist, you're getting better, you're learning more about, you're becoming more musical, you can write more complex stuff. So I think in the later albums, they have put together more kind of like complex music compared to the early stuff where it's more hard on your sleeve. Guys in a band room jamming it out, figuring it out, live recording and all that. But they've still got, I think that's what's been good about the Rogers songwriting within the vessel of You and My, is that he's stuck to his roots with songs like Would Have Been Me on The Lives of Others, where it's kind of like a simple rocker, but fits in really well in the later albums. So I think that, let's suppose you are the Kathy's Clown, the Mr. Milk fan from the early days, and you want those kind of like pop rock songs, you can still find them with The Waterboy and Would Have Been Me on the later albums. But there's just a bunch of other stuff because they've matured and they're trying new stuff as well. So I think that's perhaps a disappointment for some artists or fans of artists as they get older is that they completely abandon some of the styles that made them famous or popular in the first place. But I think with UMI, there's a continuation there across pretty much the entire discography.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to something else that this process has made me think about, and I guess thinking about how Tim and the band have kind of processed their trajectory from being, quite popular to not being so popular and kind of being, maybe forgotten for a while and then, coming back maybe to a bit more of an appreciation from the public. And it kind of made me appreciate how much you're putting yourself on the line when you release a record or any art, really. Like, there's people like us reviewing it. We're doing it in good faith and with good intentions, but putting yourself out there like that, the reality is you could be blindsided at any time, like emotionally, by like a bad review or by people who maybe just don't get it. So that made me realize how brave it is to be an artist. Like, I'm a non-artist. I've always respected art and artists, but I guess I never really understood how precarious it must sometimes feel when you're out there, or when you're out there when something hasn't quite worked the way you wanted to, because people don't know what's gone on in the background. They can only really judge what they see. So yeah, it made me think about that. I guess being in a band is probably would be pretty complicated. Like, I mean, sure, it's probably fundamentally just fun, but what I'm saying is I think I have a better idea that there's always more than meets the eye, and getting to the starting line, i.e., in this case, releasing a record, or in your case, might be releasing a book, or it might be doing a painting. That's an achievement, and it's a minor miracle in terms of band, in the context of all the uncontrollables, and in the context of how complex human relationships can be. It's a minor miracle if it comes out any good, and let alone decent or even a classic. So yeah, the role of artist and the precariousness of releasing art into the world, this podcast made me appreciate that a bit more.
Yeah, I remember seeing this Father John Misty interview a while ago. It might have been KEXP as well, or I believe he was interviewing his audience or something. It's this random snippet I remember where he was talking to some young, attractive girl in the audience, and he was getting his flirt on, but basically he was saying to her, she was saying like, "Oh, I want to be an artist, but I don't know how," or whatever, and he basically just cut the bullshit. He was like, "Stop being such a pussy." He basically he was essentially like, condensed. He was like, "You've got the magic within you. You've just got to get out of your own way and let it happen." And it's funny how you can hear something and you can just like run with that and be like, "Yeah, that's a good point. Why should I be such a I think that I've released a couple things and that's just been my general principle in terms of like when I'm creating something, is like, don't be such a pussy, like just do your best and then put it out there. But from my limited experience, there is kind of inevitably at some point before it comes out, the heart-stopping moment where you're like, holy shit, I'm exposing far too much of myself. And it sucks, and no one's gonna like it, and I'm gonna ruin whatever remaining aspects of my reputation that I have. It's all gonna go down the sink because of this thing that I'm gonna do. And you got to take a deep breath and then do it anyway. Stop being such a pussy. Yeah. And so I think about, in my limited experience of putting things out, and with the guys in this band, they've done it on a far greater scale, and so that would have involved a lot of pressure when it's like, yeah, last album was number one, is the next one going to be number one? And then also just, as you get older and you get further into your career, can you top the early stuff, or whatever expectation you feel like is coming from the outside or internally? It's a big thing to get over each time And so yeah, I applaud it because I know the challenges that come with it in a very limited aspect personally.
Yeah, and it must be, especially like when you're part of your process is like putting, your an element of honesty out into the world, and so that honesty means how you feel about other people at a certain time and people that you're in relationships with. Like I can't contemplate doing that. Sometimes I have feelings about people, and if I put them out into the world, that I can't actually comprehend how I could survive that that kind of reality. And so when you're putting out songs that are really like personal about some of your most personal moments and some of your biggest failings, or some of your partner's biggest failings, or some of your friends' biggest failings, that cannot be easy that must be very difficult to kind of experience that process of bringing it out, and just because I'm just only in my own mind, so I would find it hard to compartmentalize and go, oh, well, it's just art, and I'm still gonna just continue my relationships as they are. I'd be like, oh my god, what are they gonna think, and like surely like how are they gonna react, and all this sort of stuff. So I am obviously quite a perhaps neurotic being, so art and that kind of thing is not for me, perhaps, but I definitely have a huge respect for people having the guts, and it is gutsy. That's the only way I can think about it, to put stuff out there for other people to kind of do what they want with it, say what they want about it. It's absolutely brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've wondered about that in the past. Is it gutsy, or is it by creating these characters and creating art, are you just avoiding the obvious, like go talk to that person about this issue? You can find an explanation or come up with a reason why you need to do that for anything, because it's like, this person wouldn't hear it if I told them directly or whatever. But I think that ultimately it's pretty cool to be the vicarious recipient of this kind of cosmic just emotion and stuff that people put into music, and I think that's why, like I was saying before, the context. If I don't know this, take a song like Damage, for example, I don't know the specifics of what was going on in the band at the time or with Tim Rogers, but I kind of don't need to know because everything's in the song. It's like it's all there, and I kind of feel like any additional context, it might be useful, but I feel like it's all kind of in the mix, and I can get out of it everything I need to. So I like this kind of deep dive stuff, but that's kind of the magic of master craftsmen who can bring this stuff to life, is that if the song's great, you don't need the extra context or need to know what's going on.
Yeah, it's funny, like I'm imagining a songwriter being in a relationship, and the songwriters released an album about that relationship and the ups and downs, and then the partner would come to the songwriter and say, we need to talk, and he'd be like, just let me get my guitar. Just let me get my guitar.
Okay, here comes the follow-up.
I'm just going to tune up. Hang on, just let me tune up, and then I'll explain.
Yeah, we didn't need a capo for this one.
Yeah.
I think we basically got through everything on the. You had one thing here, mateship. What were you kind of referring to? Were you talking about kind of the relationships within the band, or what were you getting at?
I guess I was just like kind of respectful of any kind of long-term relationship that lasts, and I guess as I was kind of discussing, how fragile a band ecosystem can be, and so staying together for 30 years and maintaining those friendships, I reckon is an immense achievement. I mean, look at us, Tommy. Like we're we're two fellas that have a deep love and respect for each other. Yet we lost contact for a few years, and there was no bad faith there. But it shows how slippery friendships can be, and if you're not careful, you kind of can lose them before you realise that they're gone. And so keeping at it for 30 years with all the shit that comes with the lifestyle, the pressures at various times, that's some achievement. And I get the sense in you and my case, the band has preserved the relationships, and the relationships have preserved the band as well. It's probably like a kind of lucky confluence, or maybe that's kind of the beauty of being in a band if you approach it in the right way. So that's what I was getting at with that one.
Yeah, I saw this interview that Davey and Tim did after the Lives of Others was about to come out, and they were comparing the recording of that album compared to Porridge and Hot Sauce, and they were saying that like Porridge and Hot Sauce was a lot of fun, but they did it, in that Daptone studio in sweaty Brooklyn summer, had to do it in 6 days, and they were like on top of each other, loud amps, and like, sorry, what was that? Couldn't really like hear each other. The producers screaming, and like, kind of lots of confusion, like being on top of each other, and frustrations are going to boil to the surface a lot quicker in that environment. Whereas Davey was comparing that to the Lives of Others and how they were emailing each other like, here's my part. And then the other person would be like, oh, I had something more of this in mind. And he was saying like, basically had to like, oh, I fucking figured it out already. Like, but because of the distance and I guess the time, they were able to be like, just sleep on it. And the next day and be like, oh yeah, I'll figure out a new part that, that's no big deal. So the kind of, it just makes you realize that, just because these guys have known each other for a long time and they've gone through lots of ups and downs, doesn't mean it's going to be all gravy now that they're a bit older, and like that there would still be the ongoing complications of like, we've got to try and make something. Everyone's going to pull together on this and all the bullshit that comes with that. But, so there's that. And then there's also, just in terms of like, just our friendship and doing this pod together, that is kind of like why I wanted to do this pod, is like you were talking about in the last episode, you need sport to actually have an opportunity to talk to your friends. That's the thing that you can stare out where you actually chat with each other. So I was like, well, our sport can be you and mine. We can do this. And it is a strange thing with like men and friendships as you get older. And like, I remember looking at my dad and the other dads that I grew up around when I was a kid, my friends' fathers, and I was like, none of them have friends. They should be friends with each other. It's like, I felt like I should have been a dad matchmaker. I was like, you both like sport and beer, be mates. But none of them were. They were all just siphoned off by themselves. And then lo and behold, I'm in my mid-30s now. And I look at all the men my age and the same thing's happening again. Because I think we just kind of, I don't know, there's this thing where you roll over and accept it. And in terms of us losing contact, I think there's almost like there's this thing for me where I feel like, oh, I don't deserve a friendship. It's like this thing where you're like, oh, I'm a piece of shit. I don't, all the good stuff that comes with it, you feel like, nah, I'm kind of like, I've had my fill, and I can't do that. I don't know. It's this weird male thing, but then you break through it and you put yourself in a situation where it's easy to have ongoing communication. You're like, what was this monster that I was creating in my mind? Like, it's once you reconnect with people, it's simple as, but I don't know what is the male impulse there that's going on? Why do we do that?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Like when, it's all in your mind often, where you feel like you don't deserve a friendship. Maybe you forgot someone's birthday, or you kind of like have just been busy with other stuff and you kind of have missed out on a couple of things, and then things go silent a bit. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess I've kind of lost that opportunity. And even though like the other person's not even thinking about that in the slightest.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
Time goes on, and then before you know it, it's been a couple of years, and you're like, well, I'd like to text him or her, but maybe it's too late now. You kind of get to a point where it could be too late. So, I do know what you mean.
Yeah, there's also kind of the just the concept of being like, I am working on myself. I'm like trying to be a good person, like trying to take care of business with my job or my life or my art, my family. And then the assumption that one day all the pieces will put themselves back together. It's like, oh yeah, and I'll be a fully complete person and all my friends will be there, even though you put no effort into making that happen. You've just been controlling these three pieces and ignoring all the rest. That's kind of like I think a fallacy, or it's almost this weird fairy tale that I think anyway, it's
another thing that sort of comes to my mind as we're getting older. When you're in your teens and your early 20s, you spend, I don't know, let's say 20% of your time with people who you consider are cool people and awesome people, and that's great. That's a lot of time to spend with cool and awesome people. And so you have that circle of maybe, I don't know, 50 people that you think are cool and awesome, that you spend 20% of your time with. And then as you get older, because of different commitments and work and family and whatever, you're moving away, those 50 people, instead of taking up 20% of your time, might take up 5% of your time. So unless you're kind of making new relationships and kind of putting in the effort to kind of meet new people, I'm thinking of your dad example there, then you're only therefore, as you get older, spending 5% of your time with people you think are awesome or cool, because those 50 people in your circle are all busy, you're busy. And so instead of spending 20% of your time with cool or awesome people, you're spending 5% of your time with cool or awesome people. And that can only be detrimental to your health, I imagine. And so that's kind of been the light bulb for me over the last few years. It's like, don't rest on your laurels with your existing group. Keep yourself open to other relationships. And, if people say, do you want to come for a drink? And you're like, I don't really know about you, mate. Maybe the better option is to go, yeah, I'll come for a drink. Yeah, or give things a go. So that's kind of something that what you said kind of raised that thought that's been bubbling in my mind over the last few years as well.
Yeah, you almost allow yourself to get ratioed. You're like, I used to have 50% of cool people. Now it's 5%, but yeah, that's just my lot in life, and I have to accept it. Right. It's like, come on, pull your fucking finger out, make it happen. But
yeah.
All right. Well, to round things off, why don't we do the podium, the album podium?
Well, if you don't mind, Tom, I've got one more thing that I wouldn't mind
please
just discussing, because we have touched on it, but I just want to go a bit further on it. We were talking about our best ofs and the art of piecing an album together and the sequencing of an album. And that's one of the things I've actually grown to appreciate more through this process as well, and the importance of the flow on from one song to the next. And I do, this will hopefully lead to our album podium, but like the fact that a song can be made 30%, that's unscientific, more enjoyable just because of the song that comes before or after it. And of course, as I mentioned, I tried my own sequencing through the rejigged Dress Me Slowly. But yeah, we did discuss last week how generally we think You Are My songs sound worse on the radio, and maybe that has something to do with them being out of album context. And I don't know how I feel about that, because that suggests they're geniuses at albums, but maybe it suggests they're not so good at songs, but that kind of makes me feel queasy. But on the subject of album sequencing, I got thinking as we were preparing for this show, that in a meta kind of way, you can kind of look at the UMI records as tracks of a meta UMI album. So each record is a track. The vibe of each record represents the track. So, first off, this meta record, for example, is the bull out of the China shop. What an intro, sound as ever. Then tracks 2, 3, and 4, they draw you in. They're irresistible. Track 5 is maybe the big budget single that maybe doesn't quite land as you hoped, but is still good and that you'll appreciate more 20 years down the track. Track 6, ends the first side on a looser note, we're at Deliverance here. Side 2 kicks us off, all guns blazing again, convicts. Then we get a couple of serious album tracks. And, for the avoidance of doubt, there's no negative connotation intended for the use of the term album track there. And then track 10, trying a few things, porridge and hot sauce. And finally, track 11 ties everything up beautifully in a neat little bow, referencing all that came before it, but progressing the thread to a clever conclusion. So, of course, you're left wanting more. You're left reading the liner notes and looking up the names listed, who's Jimmy and the Bludgers, who's Caramel Hugh, who's Captain Shipshape. You want to sort of learn about all the influences and what they've done to the band I love. So that's kind of one thing I just was thinking about during the week that I wanted to share, how I've kind of was trying to sort of piece it all together, these 11 albums that we've been through over the last few months. And in my mind, it kind of morphed into like this meta album all on its own. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very cool way to look at it. It does definitely illustrate the journey. And yeah, you make a good point in terms of the, just diving into a little bit more about why the UMI songs sound better on their own albums as opposed to on the radio. And I think you could argue that it's because they've been crafted as part of an album. That they're meant to fit within the specific sequence of the album. They're getting some cream from the prior track, and they're maybe passing it on to the one beyond that track. And then there's also maybe just like there's something singular and specific about Tim Rogers' songwriting. Like here's a random example. I remember there's a band from the UK called Foals. I've never really been a fan of them, but when I was living in London, I remember they were like the hot new thing on NME. The first songs came out and there was like very angular, there's the music journo word, post-punk, yelpy type of lyrics, and that was their sound. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a new band, not my thing. Cut to 10 years later or something, some song on Triple J, and it sounded a lot like Muse or something. I was like, who's this? Is this Muse? And I looked it up and it was Foals. And I was like, that sounds too much like something else. It had gone too far. Whereas I felt like there's a consistency and there's a kind of like a through line with all the UMI tracks that they're all like each other, but they're kind of different to other music. That's why whenever I've made a comparison to like, oh, this sounds a bit like the Jam, or a lot of the kind of twangy guitars has kind of like a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, or maybe like a Byrd's quality or something like that. It's very much just like specific elements of songs that remind me of other artists. The song itself is kind of like very much a unique UMI Tim Rogers thing. And so I think that perhaps might explain why their songs are a little jarring on the radio, or like, because it's not, they don't sound like other stuff on the radio, perhaps.
You're saying that just quickly makes me think also like a question that comes into my mind sometimes is like, what song, if someone's like, okay, you talk about UMI all the time, what song should I start with? That would be a very torturous question, but I have thought about it. But interestingly, my answer is none of the songs that we've spoken about throughout these whole 12 episodes, 0 of them. I'm going to take you back to the first episode where you talked about how you got into UMI, and it was through getting the Cream and the Crock best of compilation. And I asked you, did you get the double album version? You said yes, of course I did. And that's probably, there's 2 songs from there that I would probably suggest for people to start, and that would be What They Do at Night and Mr. Kermode's Million Matches or something. There's 2 sort of new tracks that they made for that particular best of that I think kind of straddle that kind of line of doing the sort of classic UMI sound, but also doing something different than what anyone else is doing. There's something quite unique. There's childhood memories. There's what they do at night. There's office observations, but also like there's progress from their albums up until that point as well. So that kind of makes me think that I wanted to mention that before the end. That is that those two songs I love so much, and I haven't had a chance to speak about them, but they would actually be, if someone said, how do I get into You and My? That's probably the middle point. Those two songs, I'll go, here is What They Do at Night and Mr. Kermode's Million Matches, and then spread out in 360 from there. So,
yeah, that's kind of the where the atom implodes on itself and then spurts out in every direction. But yeah, I would make a very, going back to the my initial pitch of this podcast to Johnno, where I said, yeah, you could loosely categorize the UMI songs. You got the jewels and the bullets. You got the intricate, kind of well-crafted, more emotional jewels, and then you've got the upbeat rockers, the bullets. Johnno interpreted that as you've got the good ones and then the bad ones, and I'm not doing a pod about that because there's no bad ones. So once I kind of allayed his fears, basically, what I would do there is I'd say, okay, you got jewels and bullets. The jewel would be Heavy Heart, and the bullet would be Berlin Chair.
Yeah,
that would be my access point for like someone, an alien who came to Earth and said, "Tell me about the band you speak of," because they're going in either direction there. But yeah, that's my basic.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, mate. Should we do our album?
Yeah, let's do the album. But just one final thing. Yeah. I wanted to figure this out. Trouble, the song Trouble.
Yeah.
How did that's a standalone single, right? How did that fit into the mix, or how did that come about?
Oh, yeah, good question. So the version of Trouble on the Cream and the Crock disc 2 is like a demo version. The actual version was released on the Dirty Deeds soundtrack with Bernard Fanning on vocals.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that was the first. That's the official release. Bernie's Fanning.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. And the version that you hear on the Cream and the Crock is like the sort of demo version that led to, and then Bernie took it from there, and it's a really, really good version. And the Dirty Deeds, there's a couple of You and My original songs on that, but there's a lot of cool tracks as well. So Bernie sings on a couple, and Phil Jamieson sings on a couple, Tex Perkins sings on a couple, and then there's like some sort of classic Aussie 60s stuff that they pull out of the kit bag, which is really cool as well.
Did Bernie and Tim ever have beef? Well, because like Powderfinger, as we've discussed, with just like this this tidal wave, all of a sudden, just that dun, 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 that riff, Vulture Street. Okay, you couldn't escape it for a while, but like, was there any like personal animosity there, or was it just like, oh, they're the new band?
Not that I'm aware of. Like, I'm sure, it'd be natural for Tim to be like, oh, what, but from all the kind of references I've heard, that they have like quite an affection for each other. And I remember a couple of things that I'll bring up. So once it was in 1998, Tim won Best Male Artist for his solo album, What Rhymes with Cars and Girls. And Harry Connick Jr. was presenting the award, and then like Tim like received the award, then walked off, said his bit, and then walked off, and then Harry Connick Jr. is like, can someone get this guy a calm? And a throwaway line, but like everyone was like offended. And then Powderfinger came up, subsequently, to do whatever, and they just like basically defended Tim and sort of gave Harry Connick Jr. shit. So there's that. And then when Tim was doing his season of his TV show, he had Bernard Fanning on when Bernard released his second or third solo album, and they spoke really like affectionately with each other and about old times. And so I get the sense that there's been no animosity. I'm sure, like with like any relationship, you sort of half competing with each other, and there would have been like, oh shit, how they got so big and we're not. But I think generally speaking that they've got a pretty solid collegiate relationship. I'm
glad to hear that, because I always didn't like Powderfinger anywhere near to the level of UMI, but always thought they were nice fellas. So it pleases me to hear. And just quickly on Harry Connick Jr., I remember when I was like 6 years old, he had that big hit, I Just Whisper Your Name.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember that because I was like 6 years old learning about like humping at school, like the very early phases of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then understanding that it was taboo and like, that's something that like I'm not meant to know. Probably shouldn't know it now. Just pretend you don't know. And then Harry Connick Jr. comes on the TV, and in that song, there's a line where I'm on Google Lyrics right now. He says, "Why was I humming?" And I heard that as "Why was I humping?" And I was just blown away that someone could just say this on the TV. I was like, oh, so we are meant to talk about it. It was really Harry Connick confused me, the 6-year-old me, in a big way for years.
Wow, it probably led you down a certain path. That was probably quite a moment. Yeah,
no, definitely. It was very confusing. All right, we've teased the listener enough. Let's get into it. So, do you want to? I'll go first because let's face it, everyone's here for Johnny Dunk. So, I thought long and hard about this. I'm gonna go bronze, Hi-Fi Way, silver, Convicts, and the gold is Owly Daily.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
That is so strong.
Which I think if someone had asked me prior to the start of this series, what would I have selected? I probably would have gone. It probably would have been the same three, but just like swapped out. Convicts would have been bronze because I would have questioned it. I'd have been like, no, just hit you at the right point in, your life or whatever. But I think ultimately, I really do like that album. I think it holds up and it just edges Hi-Fi Way, the silver, and with Owly Daily, I was like, I just couldn't look past it. That you can appreciate it as a concept album, or you can just pick out the favorite tracks that you like. It's not too concepty either, as we discussed when we did that episode. It's not like every step of this dude's day is mapped out in detail. It's kind of got enough room to move. So I couldn't look past that. And I guess probably the one who was unlucky was number 4, just missed the podium.
Oh yeah. That's interesting. Look, as we've gone through our kind of podiums for each album, there hasn't been much crossover, but there is a little bit of crossover with my podium. So drum roll, here we go. My podium is at 3. At 3, I'm going You Are My Self-Titled. That's my bronze. Okay. Number 2, I'm going Owly Daily. How can you go past that? And number 1, I'm going Convicts. Yeah. Convicts is my number 1. Yeah. I'm surprised myself actually. Like at the start of this, I probably would have had number 4 in there because that was so influential in my life. But I must admit, like, if there's any album, and so that would be still up there. Not that I want to put a position on it, but that one didn't quite hit me as much as I thought it would as we were going through it. So I kind of had to kind of just slide it out of the podium. I would have felt wrong to have it in there. And so the self-titled album I was so impressed with, and that's the album that is the opposite of my experience with number 4. That's the album where I was like kind of so into much more than I thought I would be. I kind of it kind of got lost over the years in my mind and sort of rediscovering and go, holy moly, that is an amazing album. So I really was pleased to kind of have that experience. Owly Daily, I mean, just for the balls to sort of give that kind of concept album a go, and looking at Australian suburban culture, which is like sometimes maligned, but looking at it with a kind of tender eye and those songs, and I think I mentioned at the time, but Who Takes Who Home is such an amazing way to finish an album of that kind. And then Convicts is probably the album where I'm like, if I gave this record to anyone, there is just no weak song on that album, and there is just every song is just fantastic, and you could start listening to that album at any song and sort of and go full 360 from there. So Convicts was number one. I kept coming back to. I thought about it a lot, as you can imagine, and I couldn't go past Convicts as being the album that I just think just nailed it the most for me.
Yeah, that is interesting, and you know, I guess unpacking it a little bit, Convicts, you know, Tim Rogers, a big part of his songwriting is how wordy he is, and the I guess the kind of he puts a lot of life into his characters and kind of like interesting word choices, whereas Convicts is perhaps, it's almost like this it's the antimatter of his career, where it's just like a lot of the lyrics are kind of just, it's just nonsense. It's about the feeling. It's kind of it's not as lyrically deep as the other stuff, yet it still has so much kind of raw emotion. And like in a lot of, there's been a lot said, at least for the first kind of like 8 or 9 albums. There's kind of like a lot of, you can find lots of media of the band like talking about the meaning of certain songs or kind of like the background, but whereas Convicts, there's not so much about that. It's just kind of like the songs. I going through when we did the Convicts episode, I'd always interpreted it as just like this raw emotion, garage rock, and I was interested to try and dive in and find if there was anything more lyrically, and there doesn't seem to be much, but that didn't dissuade me in any way. I still liked it as much, if not more, after going through it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I'd sort of try to point out though that when you think about some of the songs, they are pretty, like from a storytelling perspective, they are pretty interesting and varied. Because I mean, definitely the start of the album, you're kind of like, oh well, you know, he's kind of been through stuff, and this is him doing the cathartic kind of thing, which starts off the album in those first few tracks. So then you get Secrets, yeah. You get Secrets, you get By My Own Hand, you know, you get and then you get like the sort of I'm a Mess at the end about a relationship that's failed, but you kind of like, should, you know, what's happened? Why aren't we? How do we get to this? So there is some deep stuff, and then there's like the sort of, you know, the childhood stuff, the reminiscence that Tim is, you know, I think we've discussed, is kind of the best at. You know, nervous kid, explaining cricket, and then there's, you know, song I think about his mum, Constance George. So like, I definitely, that's the feel I get from Convicts as well. It's that kind of catharsis and really direct in your face. But I think the beauty of it is it also, when you delve into it, it's deeper and it's more nuanced and varied than you first think. So that's probably like one of the genius elements of it, in that it hits you in the face first few times, and then it keeps hitting you in the face, and then all of a sudden you're like, stop hitting me in the face, and then you realize it's not hitting me in the face anymore, it's actually kissing me. It's kissing me in the face. Like, oh wow. So yeah, Convicts.
Well, there we have it. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. So cool, we got some I wasn't expecting that. I thought maybe we'd have like one album on the podium together, but we got 2. So and just out of interest, which album just missed out?
Well, probably there's 2 that could have came to mind that I was thinking about. I really loved the experience of listening to Porridge and Hot Sauce and Hi-Fi Way / Number 4. Like those records are really important to me as well. So I was kind of considering how I could fit those in. But yeah, Porridge and Hot Sauce was also another surprise. And then I thought, because it was such like a bit of a mixtape album, and I just had so much fun with it. But yeah, just had to pivot in the end. You can't have them all in there. What about you? You said number 4.
Yeah, it was pretty much like those 4. Like number 4 was the one that just missed out, and I'd probably say those 4 are just like a stroke ahead of the others. Yeah, the only one that like didn't do it for me, as I expressed, was Dilettantes, and I think that's maybe just a victim of having the other albums are so strong. And there's still tracks I like off that one, but I'll put those four that ahead of the rest by a little margin. So anyway, recap episode. Here we are.
Recap episode. Before we wrap up, Tom, I do want to express my thanks. I want to get a bit earnest. This is going to be
earnest.
Fun.
Here we go.
Well, I mean, the experience of doing the pod has been so awesome, and it's really been like a once in a lifetime kind of thing. So, therefore, I want to thank you. It's your idea, and like as lame as it will sound, and as awkward as earnestness is between two old mates who haven't been drinking, you have given me a gift, a once in a lifetime gift, to be able to go deep on something that I'm passionate about and that I care about, and it's kind of helped me get a richer understanding of the band and of their approach to art and a deeper understanding of my relationship with it all. And in some ways, like I think I mentioned it before, it's kind of like been like free therapy. People who've had to suffer through all my personal anecdotes, the teen anxieties, the neuroses. All I can say is, sorry, but I'm sure you'll understand that a fan's relationship with a band is personal, and even if you've never met them. So I actually can't articulate how fun the process has been, and it could have only be done through this mechanism, through something like a pod. So I wouldn't have done it otherwise. So Thommy, please accept my extremely earnest thanks. It's really been like the funnest of rides, and as for a super fan of a band, short of being adopted by one of them, this is as good as it gets. So yeah, thanks, mate.
No worries, mate. And completely 100% reciprocated. I think a long time ago in a galaxy far away, myself and Johnno spent it was like a week almost in Yellowstone National Park, and I brought my trusty old pod equipment, which would look pretty fucking vintage at this point. But what I was lugging out there, and we recorded we just trundled off to by the side of the lake, and I was like, got your top 5 you and my songs at the time. So that was probably the beginning. I remember that was a lot of fun because I was able to just kind of ask you and get more of an idea of what you liked about the band, and it kind of allowed me to kind of learn a bit more. But I agree. It's been you got to do a bit of homework. You got to listen to an album, but that was I really enjoyed doing that and figuring out what was going on, and the excuse to kind of jump on the mic. But appreciate you sharing the knowledge because I've, like you said, probably need a little break from the UMI experience, but then I'm just gonna dive right back in with unbridled enthusiasm after going through this. So also, it's not the end either. We've got some ideas. We're going to take a little break. We will, and then we'll consider doing some Tim solo albums. They could just drop a surprise album at any moment, so we'd have to record an emergency episode.
So we won't close it off. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, but at least for now, we'll take a little break. But it's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Oh yeah, and so just to close things out, we will we'll put I'm not sure when we'll get this done, but we'll add our Spotify 3-disc best ofs to the episode description. You can either find it if you're listening on the pod app or on YouTube. You'll find the links there, so you can give them a spin. Let us know in the comments who's got the superior playlist, or just tell us about the differences of the quirks of each. But we will we'll drop those links so you can give them a spin. And stay tuned. Share it around. Till next time, peace out.
See you, folks. Thanks, Tom.